Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel SK Tech. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the relationship between objects. So, what is relationship between object? It is possible to create the object for a different classes and establish the relationship between them. When the objects are related, it is possible to access and use member of one object in another object, right? So this become an advantage when the object should start processing data where another object has left. So it is also helpful to pass the data from one object to another object and from there to another object in the chain form. So there are basically three way to relate the object in Java. First is like using the references, second is like using the inner class concept, and third is like using inheritance. So we will discuss in detail one by one. So let's discuss first like relating objects using references. So let us create the two classes 1 and 2. Suppose we want to access the member of a 2 in class 1, we should relate their objects. So something like this. Just declare the reference variable of a class 2 as an instance variable inside the class 1. Okay, now the reference variable t can be used to refer all the member of a class to from one class, right? For example, let's say to call the display method from the class 2, we can write something like t.display, and to access the instance variable from the class 2, we can something like this t.y. Okay, so let us understand with the help of the example. So let's go to the IntelliJ IDE and let's create one class like 1 where we are going to provide some instance variable like x, and let's say here we want to use the class 2 object. So we will declare like instance variable of the class 2, and let's create one simple constructor of the class 1. Since the class 2 is dependent class for class 1, so we need to initialize it. So best way to initialize is the dependent class is like inside the constructor. So how we can do it? Something like t and then this dot t equal to t, and let's say we have some method called, let's say, void display, and inside that let's call the display method of the 2 class. So how we can do it? We can write something like, so let's first write some statement here. So let's say one's class variable is like, what is the variable? X, and then t dot display of class 2. Don't worry about the display method and all, we will implement it later point of time. And then let's write some statement like to's variable. So something like we can access with the help of the instance variable, that is t dot, let's say variable name is y. Now let's go to create the 2 class implementation. 2, let's give the instance variable as y, and let's create some constructor. So let's say 2, and inside that let's initialize it, that instance variable. So let's say something like this dot y equal to y, and let's create the implementation of the display method here. So that should be like void display, and let's write some statement here. So let's say something like to's y equal to plus y. So this is the implementation of the to's class that we are using inside the one class. So now let's test it, how we can do it. Let's create another class. So let's give the name as relate, and here let's create one main method, and let's create first 2 class object because that is the dependent class for the one class. So let's give the object name as 2 equal to new 2, and let's provide some value for the variable, and then let's create the one class object. Let's say object 1 equal to new object 1, and that is expecting like the dependent class variable, so that is nothing but the object 2 only, right? Now let's use the object 1 and call the display method. So what it is going to happen when you call the display method? First we have created the instance variable of the 2 class, and then we have created the instance variable of the 1 class, and then we have passed this object 2 to 1 because this 2 object is the dependent of class 1. And then using the object 1, we have called the display method. So what is happening here? So it is going to print the first variable of the x that we have passed, right, and then it is going to call the display method of the to class, and then it is going to print the instance variable of the to class. So let's go back and run this program and see the output. Yeah, so if you can see what is happening here, the relate class main method is executed and it is printing like one's variable equal to 0 and two's variable is like y. So one's variable is what? So let's give the some name also basically inside the ones. Let's give the x, and then it is printing like two's variable is 22. So what is happening here? Let's understand with the help of the diagram. So at the time of creating the class 1's object, we pass the reference of the class 2 object, something like this, right? Or one object 1 equal to new object 2, and here the reference of the 2 object is passed to the 1 object, and then reference object 2 value is copied into the class 1 constructor, and there it is initialize the reference t which is declared at class 1, right, something like this dot t. Here this dot t refer to the class 2 reference t declared at class 1, right. Now t refer to the class 2 object, so it can access the class 2 member. For example, let's say we call the display method, so something like we have called like t dot display, and to access the class 2 instance variable we have used like t dot y, right. So something like this was the happening inside the JVM. So we have the class 1 object, inside the class 1 object we have display method and we have x variable, and this y variable is coming from class object 2, and here class object 2 is also having some display method and some variable. So this y variable basically it is coming from class 2. So this using the reference variable basically we are able to access the instance variable of the class 2 and also the method of the 2 class. This is how we can relate the 2 classes using the references. So let's say we have a 3 classes. So how we can do it? Let's go to the IntelliJ IDE and let's write a simple Java program, then we will understand it. So what we are going to do here is, let's say we have a class 1 which is having some dependent class 2 and we have initialized it using the constructor. Now let's say we have a method something like q method, that is let's say expecting some variable like double x. So remove this for now and then let's write the logic for this. So let's say double result equal to x multiply by object dot square method of x value, and then let's return it. So basically what we are trying to do here is, let's say we have a square method inside the class 2 variable and we want to calculate the cube of this value. So what we can do, we can use the existing method of the dependent class square method to calculate the square of the variable, and then we can multiply by the same variable, then it will become as a cube of the variable, right. So let's go to the, let's return first here. So let's go to the object 2. Basically what is the object 2? So that is nothing but the t only, right. So let's go to the class 2 and define the square method. Now we are trying to understand the, if we have a 3 class, how can we relate it? So let's create the another class, that is let's say class 3. Okay, and let's write some logic here. So let's say we have some method like, simply one method like get. So that is going to give double get, and what are the value that we are providing here, that is going to basically print it or return it. So let's write something like return x. There is some simple implementation, and let's go to the class 2. And so here in the class 2, let's say we want to use the functionality of the class 3. So we can define the instance variable of the class 3. So something like class 3, and let's say we have given the object as object 3, and to, since this is the dependent class, so how we can do it? So we can, best way to initialize the variable of the dependent class is like inside the constructor, because constructor is responsible to create the object of the class and we want to initialize it the dependent class. So right, so that's why we need to give inside the constructor only. Let's say constructor something like obj3, and here we can give obj3 equal to obj3. And let's remove for now this instance variable. Let's say we have a dependent class only, right? And here let's say write the logic of the square method, so that we have calling it here, right? So let's give the name here, and let's say this is expecting some variable that is of type double, let's say x, and here what it is going to do, it is going to do the double of the variable and then going to return it, right? So let's see if we have the existing functionality in the dependent class and we can use it. So let's say we want to use the functionality of the 3 class, that is get method. How we can do it? So we can write something like double result, let's say in one variable, let's provide the x multiply by object 3 dot get and provide the variable, and then let's return this. So this should be some double type, and this 2 class is using here. Yes, okay, so this is something that we are going to test it. So basically what we are trying to do here, let's say we have a class 3 which is having some functionality, let's say get, and that functionality we want to use it inside the 2 class. We will create the instance variable of the class 3 and then we first will initialize it. So initialization is like best way to do inside the constructor, and then using that object we are writing some logic here. Let's say we have a requirement to get the square of the variable or square of the number. So inside the square we are using the functionality of the 3 class to get the variable value and then multiply by the x and then get the square of the variable or square of the value. And let's say inside the 1 class we want to write the logic to get the cube of the number. So since we have already some classes which is getting the square of the number, we are utilizing it. So that is like class 2. So we have created the class 2 variable and initialize it inside the constructor, and then using the instance variable we have call it and then multiply by the x to write the logic or to complete the functionality of the cube, and then we are returning it. So this is something like, let's say one class is developing some functionality and some part of the functionality is already developed by some other class, so we can use it. So we can create the instance variable, use the functionality. Similar to the another class also, let's say having some functionality and we want to develop some new functionality by using some half part of the functionality already developed by the other class. So we have used this 3 class and we have called this functionality. This can be implementation of the anything. This is just for the demonstration purpose we have given like get. And then inside the relate method what we can do, so first we need to create the dependent class object, or let's say we want to create the 1 class object. So how we can do, let's say object 1 equal to new object 1. So object 1 it is required like class 2 object. So we need to create the class 2 object, let's say object 2 and then new class 2. Again class 2 object is required, so let's pass first here class 2 object is required class 3 object. So we need to create the class 3 object, let's say object 3 equal to new class 3, right? And since it does not have any default constructor any parameterized constructor, so default constructor only, and we are passing it like something like this, right? Now using the class 1 object what we can call, so let's say call the functionality of the class 1 object. Class 1 is like cube, let's provide some value like 5, and now let's print it. So let's say we are saying cube of 5 plus, let's store this somewhere. So let's say result 1, and here just concatenate it result 1, right? Similarly let's call the square method of the class 2 object. So that is something like, let's say print it some result 2 and then obj2 dot square number. So let's say we want to get the square of 6, and let's print this also, that is something like square of 6. Now let's run this program and see the output. Here I can see that the cube of the 5 it is printing like 125 and square of the 6 it is printing 36. So here what we have observed, we have seen like there is a relationship between the object and that can be established by multiple ways. So here we have established with the help of the reference variable. So basically one class is having some requirement to develop some, let's say cube functionality, and already one class is there that is have already developed the square root functionality. So if you want to develop the q root functionality of any number, if you have the square root functionality of any number, you can easily do it. So we can call the dependent class object of that functionality like square root of functionality and then multiply by the same number, that it is become cube. Similarly, that class is also, let's say want to develop, when we have develop is like square root. So he can develop if he have already get the number from some other class, right? So he can just use this functionality and complete this functionality. So this is how one class is related to the two class and two class is related to the third class. So in this way we have understand like we can establish the connection between the three class also, right? So now let's discuss the another topic that we want to discuss today, that is the inner class. So what is inner class? So inner class is a class written within another class. Inner class is basically a safety mechanism since it is hidden from other classes in its outer classes. To make instance variable not available outside of the class, we can use the private access specifier before the variable, right? That's what how we have seen in one of the video. So this is how we provide the security mechanism to variable. Similarly, in some other cases, we want to provide the security for the entire class. In this case, we can use the private access specifier before the class. But the problem is, if we use the private access specifier in a class, the class is not available to the Java compiler or JVM. So it is illegal to use the private before a class name in a Java, right? But private specifier is allowed before an inner class, and thus it is useful to provide the security for entire inner class. When private is used before the inner class, it is not available to other class. This means that object to the inner class cannot be created in any other classes. Suppose we are writing the bank account class with some bank account detail like balance, rate and interest as an instance variable, and we want to develop some functionality like, let's say, calculate interest. So method to the calculate interest amount and add it to the balance amount, something like this, right? We have developed the functionality of the calculate interest inside that. So there is no security for this code, right? Since we did not use any access specifier before the bank account class, it comes under like default access specifier, and you know that default indicate that class is available to any other class outside. So any other programmer can easily create an object to this class and access the member of the class, and hence there is no security for the bank class. So for example, programmer can write another class where he can create an object to the bank class and call the calculate interest method, something like this, and then he can manipulate the functionality of the calculate interest, right? So calculate interest method is a very sensitive method. It should be protected from the outside. If it is available to another programmer, they may call it as shown earlier, and the balance amount in the bank will be updated. So only authorized people should be able to update the balance amount, and hence calculate interest method should not be available to other. So the way to provide security to calculate interest method and the rate of interest is to write them inside the class interest and make it private inner class in bank account class, right? So in that way, what will happen, since interest class is declared as private, an object to it cannot be created in any other class. Then how to use inner classes? So basically we can create an object to the inner class in its outer class. For this purpose, method contact can be written in outer class where the inner class object is created, and any programmer should interact with the inner class by calling the contact method. Some authentication procedure to verify user can be implemented in contact method. When the user call the method, he is verified, and if he is a legitimate user, then only the inner class object is created. So let us write some simple Java program to understand this inner class concept, then we will understand in detail. So let us write a program to create outer class first bank class and inner class like interest class, and then we will see how to protect it. So let's go to IntelliJ IDE. So let's close this all and create one simple class like bank account, and let's create some variable, instance variable like double, and let's initialize it like double bal, and then this dot bal equal to balance, right? And now let's create this simple method that is going to interact with the inner class that we have discussed. Like, let's say create a simple class like contact, and here let's provide some double type value r, and let's read this value from the keyboard. So something like buffer reader that we have seen how to read the data from the keyboard, new buffer reader, then new input stream reader, then system.in. And let's provide like something like enter password. So basically this method we are implementing, we want to validate the user so that valid user can only contact to the inner class. So let's create like something like one string is like password br dot read line. Since this is a string, not required to do any parsing, but there should be some exception handling. So let's add it in the method signature itself. And then let's say if we write the logic something like, let's say pass is equal to, let's say we have given some default value like 1 2 3 4 5, then only it will be treated like a valid user. So if it is in case of a valid user, he will be able to access the inner class, right? So let's create first inner class. Let's give the name as private class and write the functionality. So let's write here, if it is a valid user, he will be able to create the object, means he will be able to access it, the calculate interest method. So let's create the object of the interest class, something like this, and using this variable let's call that method. So let's say calculate interest. Otherwise let's print like some useful like sorry, you are not an authorized person, and then simply return it with the empty. Let's go to the interest class and write the functionality of the calculate method. So something like, let's say we have a variable called private double rate, and then we have a simple constructor, let's say to initialize it, let's say double rate this dot rate equal to rate, and then we need to write the logic of the calculate interest. So let's say void, give the same name, and here let's write the logic of the calculate interest. So let's say double interest equal to, let's say balance multiply by rate and then 100. This is the simple formula to calculate the interest, right? And then let's add the value balance equal to balance plus interest, and simply let's print it here only. Some useful message like updated balance is like whatever the value of the balance. So basically what we are trying to understand here is like, let's say we have some sensitive methods functionality that we want to protect it from the outside of the class, and that we want to define inside the class only. So we cannot create the outer class as a private, because outer class private means it will not be able to access to the JVM, right? But we want to protect it. So how we can do it? We can create the class inside the class, and that class can be made as a private. So it means that outer world will not be able to access this class. They need to access it using the outer class only. So inside the outer we can write any method to authenticate it, that the user is authenticated or not. If he is a authenticated user, then only he can interact with the protected method. So like how we have defined like method like contact, and then here they can provide the value, and if that, and then it is going to ask some password. If password is correct, then only it is going to create the instance method of the interest class and going to calculate the interest and then return it or print it, basically whatever the functional. Otherwise simply one message like sorry, you are not an authorized person, and return it. It means that it is not going to do anything. Okay, so now let's test it. So let's go to let's create some simple Java class like inner class, and create the main method. So now first let's create the bank account instance variable. Let's say acc new bank account, and then here let's provide the value of the balance, like let's say 1000 or 10,000. Okay, and now we want to do the operation as like update balance account by adding interest at 9.5. okay, so how he can do it? So he can call the instance variable of the bank account and he can try to contact it and provide the value like 9.5. so when you run this program, what is happening? It is throwing some exception. Okay, it is trying to handle some exception, like let's throw it now. For now we will discuss exception handling in detail in some later point of time. So what it is trying to do, it is creating the object of the bank account and then it is trying to update the balance account by adding the interest rate of some value, let's say 9.5. so he is providing 9.5. so if you run this program, what it is going to do, it is going to call this contact method. It is going to ask some password. If the password is correct, then only it is going to calculate the interest and update the balance, otherwise it is going to throw some exception. So let's run this program and see the output. Yeah, so if you can see here, it is asking like enter password. So let's say we have enter like some wrong password, like 123 only. So if you can see here, what it is printing, sorry, you are not an authorized person. So let's run this program and this time let's provide the proper password. Now let's provide the password like 12345. yeah, so now if you can see, a balance has been updated with the interest that he has provided 9.5 and it is showing that updated value. So in this way we can develop it and protect the any functionality that we want to protect from outside of the class. So in that scenario, in that kinds of scenario, inner class is very useful. Let's understand some notation to refer the member in the inner class. So first notation is like outer class member can be referred as a outer class name dot this dot member. For example, to refer to the bank account class balance of variable in the inner class, we can write something like bank account dot this dot bal. So that will be accessible inside the inner class. Second notation is like inner class member can be referred as this dot member. For example, to refer to the inner class interest variable, we can write something like this dot interest. This is the important point to access the member of the outer class inside the inner class and inside the inner class variable inside the inner only. Now let us understand or let us summarize what are the points that we have to remember or we have discussed already about the inner class. So first is like inner class is a class that is defined inside the another class, that is called inner class. Second point we have discussed is like inner class is a safety mechanism because it is used to protect the data or some functionality from the outer class. Third is like an object to the inner class cannot be created in other classes. That is the advantage of the inner classes, right? Next point is like an object to the inner class can be created only in its outer class. So that inner class object will be protected by the outer class and outer class can implement the functionality to protect it, like we have seen using the password. That is a simple example. We can implement some other logic also to protect it. Next point is like inner class can access the member of the outer class directly. That is what we have seen in our previous video, how to access the outer class of variable inside the inner class using the outer class name dot this dot value, right? Similarly, inner class object and outer class objects are created in separate memory locations. So as per the memory concern, both the class has been created in separate memory inside the JVM. Next point that we have discussed or need to remember is like inner class object can contain the additional individual field and that can be accessed by using the this $0 that refer to its outer class object. So these are the some important topic that we have discussed about the inner class, and we have seen with the help of the example also what is the advantage of using the inner class and when we can use it. Next topic we want to discuss is like anonymous inner class. So what is anonymous inner class? So as the name suggests itself, it is the inner class without a name and for which only a single object is created. It means that anonymous inner class are very useful in writing implementing the classes for listener interface in graphics. So that basically we are not going to cover the graphic concept in this tutorial because that is very outdated in Java programming. So just understand, like anonymous inner class is like something that does not have any name. We will see in some programming, basically in Java 8 concept, where in as part of the Lambda or Stream API, how the inner classes or the anonymous classes has been converted into the Lambda. So at that point of time we will discuss in detail. So in next upcoming video we are going to discuss some important Java OOPS concept, that is the inheritance. So stay tuned, we'll meet you soon. Thank you.